They didn't knock. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled into the driveway after my shift. My stepmother's car was already there, parked at an angle the way she always did, like the driveway belonged to her and everyone else was a guest. The lights inside were all on. Every single one. The way she did when she wanted to make a point about something. I sat in my car for a moment, engine still running. I was 28 years old, I had a nursing license. I had just worked a 10-hour shift at the hospital, and I was sitting in my own driveway trying to find the courage to walk into my own house. That should have told me everything. My name is Claire. And this is the story of the night I lost everything, and the morning I got back more than I ever expected. I need to give you some background, because none of what happened that night makes sense without it. My mother passed away when I was 11. Ovarian cancer, fast and brutal. She was gone in 7 months, from diagnosis to funeral. My father remarried 3 years later a woman named Diane who had a daughter from her first marriage, a girl named Kelsey, who was 2 years younger than me. I want to be fair here. Diane was not cartoonishly cruel. She didn't lock me in a basement or make me sleep on the floor. What she did was quieter than that, and somehow worse. She made me invisible. Not in a dramatic way. In the small, daily, accumulating way that teaches a child she is less important, less deserving, less loved. My father let it happen. That is the part I spent years trying to forgive. When I was in high school, Kelsey got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a card and a gas station gift card. When I graduated nursing school, my father and Diane took Kelsey to celebrate her acceptance into a community college program the same weekend they forgot to call me. When I asked my father about it later, he said I was being sensitive. That word. Sensitive. The word men use when they don't want to deal with what they've done. But here is the thing about growing up invisible. You learn to build your own foundation. I worked through nursing school. I saved. I put every extra dollar into a down payment fund, and at 26, I bought a small house, not much, 3 bedrooms, a yard that needed work, a kitchen that needed updating, but mine. My name on the deed. My mortgage. My rules. My father asked if he and Diane could move in temporarily, while their house was being renovated. The renovation was supposed to take 3 months. That was 14 months ago. I want you to understand something. I said yes, because my father is still my father. Because some part of me, the 11-year-old girl, who lost her mother, and just wanted her dad to choose her for once, still lived inside my chest and still believed that if I was generous enough, patient enough, good enough, he would finally see me. That is not wisdom. That is grief that never got to finish. In 14 months, they had repainted 2 of my bedrooms without asking. They had replaced my kitchen curtains with ones Diane liked better. They had told Kelsey she could use my second bathroom as her own. So her things were spread across every surface. My father had set up a television in the living room that was 3 times the size of the one I'd had and called it a housewarming gift. Then told me I should be grateful. And Kelsey, 26 years old, fully employed, perfectly capable of renting her own place, had simply never left. I had started eating my meals in my bedroom. In my own house. The night it ended started with a phone call. I was in the hospital parking lot, about to drive home, when my colleague Marcus came out and sat on the hood of his car next to mine. He looked the way people look when they're about to say something they've been rehearsing. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to not be at work when you react to it. He showed me his phone. It was a screenshot of a text conversation between Kelsey and someone I didn't recognize. The texts were about a job. A nursing position. At a private medical clinic across town, the kind of place where the salary is twice what any hospital pays, where the hours are civilized, where the waiting list to get an interview is 18 months long. I had applied for that job 8 months ago. I had interviewed twice. I had been told I was a top candidate. I didn't get it. They told me the position had been filled internally. In the screenshot, Kelsey was telling her friend that she had gotten the job. At that same clinic. She was starting in 2 weeks. Kelsey is not a nurse. Kelsey is an administrative coordinator with no medical background. The job she was describing was not an administrative role. And then I read further and I understood. She hadn't gotten a nursing job. She had gotten a different position at the same clinic, and the clinic director was a man named Robert Hale. A man I had never heard of. A man, I would learn later, who had been Diane's college boyfriend before she married Kelsey's father. He had pulled Kelsey into the clinic through a side door. And something I still don't know exactly what had happened to my application. It had disappeared. Not rejected. Disappeared. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel because I am a nurse, and I know how to stay calm in a crisis. I told myself I would walk in, I would ask calmly, I would give them the chance to explain. I should have known better. Diane was sitting at my kitchen table when I walked in. My kitchen table. With a glass of wine she had poured from a bottle I had bought. She looked up at me the way she always did. Not unfriendly. Not exactly. Just with that slight adjustment in her expression that said she found my presence mildly inconvenient. Your father wants to talk to you, she said. Not hello. Not how was your shift. My father was in the living room in front of his enormous television. He muted it when I walked in, which was more consideration than he usually gave me. Sit down, Claire. I sat. He told me that he and Diane had been thinking that the house was too small for all of us. That things had been tense. That they thought it would be better if I found somewhere else to stay for a while, maybe rent an apartment, give everyone some space, let the dust settle. I want you to understand what he was saying. He was asking me to leave my own house. The house I bought. The house with my name on the mortgage. He was sitting in my living room watching my television, and he was asking me to leave. I said, very quietly, "This is my house." He said, "You're being dramatic." There it was. 28 years old and I was 11 again, standing in a kitchen, being told my feelings were too large, too inconvenient, too much. I don't know exactly what happened in the next few minutes. I remember my voice staying flat. I remember Diane appearing in the doorway. I remember Kelsey coming down the stairs, and the look on her face not quite guilty, not quite smug, somewhere in between, the look of someone who knows they've benefited from something they didn't earn, and has decided not to examine it too closely. I asked Kelsey directly about the clinic. About Robert Hale. About my application. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. My father told me I was causing drama. I walked to the front door. I don't entirely know why. Maybe I needed air. Maybe I needed to stand somewhere that felt like mine, the threshold of the house I had worked 6 years to afford. I opened it and stepped onto the porch. The door closed behind me. I heard the lock turn. I stood on my own front porch, in my scrubs, with my work bag over my shoulder and my car keys in my hand, and I listened to my family lock me out of my house. It was March in Cincinnati. Not the brutal cold of deep winter, but the cold that gets into your bones because you're not dressed for it. The cold that feels personal. I stood there for a moment thinking this was some mistake, some misunderstanding, that would resolve itself in 30 seconds. I knocked. Nobody came. I knocked again. I could hear the television. I went and sat in my car. I want to tell you something about sitting in your car locked out of your own house. There is a specific kind of grief in it that is different from any other kind. It's not sharp. It's not loud. It is the grief of finally understanding something you spent years refusing to believe. My father had made his choice. He had made it 14 months ago when he moved in and started repainting my walls. He had made it every time he called me sensitive. He had made it the day he forgot my graduation. He had simply made it official tonight. I sat in that car and I let myself cry. Not the kind of crying that asks for something. The kind that just lets go. I was on my phone, looking up hotels, when a car pulled up. It was not a limo. I want to be accurate. It was a dark blue Volvo, sensible and clean, driven by a woman I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. She parked behind Diane's car, got out, and stood in the driveway, looking at me, sitting in my own car, in my own driveway, with the expression of someone who had expected exactly this. Her name was Ruth. She was my mother's older sister. My Aunt Ruth was 63 years old. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall with silver hair she wore short and a way of standing that took up more space than her size suggested. She had moved to Portland when I was in college, and we had stayed in loose-touch birthday calls, occasional texts, one visit when I was 24. She was not a billionaire. She was not dramatic in any way. She was a retired architect who had, in her working years, quietly and consistently, built a real estate portfolio in 4 states that my mother had always described with the kind of casual awe you use for things you never expect to touch. I got out of my car. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. "Maybe 40 minutes. She looked at the house. She looked at me. She nodded once, the way she always did when she was processing something and had already decided what to do about it. "I've been trying to call you," she said. "Your phone must be on silent." It was. I turned it over. 11 missed calls and a string of texts that started at 6 that evening, well before any of this had happened. The last text said, "I'm already in Cincinnati. I need to talk to you about something important. Don't let them do anything tonight until you speak with me." I looked up at her. "How did you know?" She said, "Your mother knew your father. She knew who he would become without her. She planned ahead." I didn't understand yet. But I was about to. Ruth did not go to the front door. She went to her car and opened the back seat and took out a leather folder, the flat kind that architects carry, and she stood under the driveway light and opened it and showed me the first page. The house I was standing in front of was, in one sense, mine. I had bought it. I had paid the down payment. My name was on the mortgage. But there was a second document, a document I had never seen, filed 2 days after my closing, by a trust that I had never known existed. The trust was called the Eleanor Marchetti Living Trust. Eleanor Marchetti was my mother's name before she married my father. My mother had a trust. The trust held a deed that superseded my purchase not to take the house from me, but to protect it. There was language in it I would need a lawyer to fully explain, but what Ruth explained to me in the driveway, with her reading glasses on and her voice completely level, was this. My mother had saved money for years before she died. Not a fortune. Enough. She had worked with an estate attorney who was also a family friend to set up protections specifically designed for the scenario where my father remarried and his new family displaced me in my own life. She had even specified real property, that if I ever purchased a home, the trust would attach a protective deed that prevented any cohabitant, without my written annual consent from claiming tenancy rights. She had thought of things I hadn't known to think of at 11 years old and couldn't have understood even if I had. My mother had watched over me from a document filed 17 years ago. I sat down on the porch steps because my legs stopped working. Ruth sat beside me. She did not say anything for a while. She just let me be in it. Then she said, "Your father and Diane have been living in your house for 14 months without a signed tenancy agreement. Under the terms of the trust and Ohio state law, I have already retained an attorney. He is available by phone right now if you want to start the process tonight." I looked at her. "What process?" She said, "Removal. Not eviction. Removal. Because they had no tenancy agreement. Because there was no signed documentation. Because they had moved into my home on a verbal agreement for a renovation period that had expired 11 months ago and had never been extended in writing." I asked her how fast. She said, "We can have a notice of unlawful occupancy served tomorrow morning. They'll have 72 hours. I thought about my father telling me I was dramatic. I thought about Diane's wine glass. I thought about Kelsey's face in the stairway, that look that was almost guilty, and decided not to be. I said, "Tomorrow morning." Ruth made a phone call. I sat on my porch steps and listened to her speak to an attorney named Daniel in a voice that was completely matter-of-fact. Like she was discussing a renovation schedule. Because to her, in a way, this was just a structure that needed to be corrected. After she hung up, she looked at me and said, "Where do you want to sleep tonight?" I said, "I'm not leaving my porch." She sat with me for 2 more hours. I want to tell you what those 2 hours were. They were not triumphant. They were not angry, exactly, though there was anger in them. They were something I can only describe as settling the feeling of a thing that has been off balance for a very long time, finally finding its level. Ruth told me things about my mother that I hadn't known. That my mother had specifically chosen the attorney from her book club, a woman named Patricia who practiced estate law and whom my mother had trusted precisely because she didn't know my father. That my mother had cried when she set up the trust, not from fear, but from grief that she had to. That she had told Ruth, "I just need to know that Claire will have somewhere that is hers. Just one place that is completely hers." I had that place. I had always had it. I just hadn't known. At midnight, Ruth went to stay at a hotel. I slept in my car. I've had worse nights. Daniel arrived at 9 the next morning, a compact man in a gray coat with a briefcase and the unshakable calm of someone who has done this many times. He knocked on the door. Diane answered, saw him, and immediately tried to close the door. He held out the notice and said, in the politest possible voice, "You are required to accept service. Refusing to accept does not invalidate service." I stood at the end of the driveway with Ruth. I watched. My father came to the door. He saw Daniel. He saw the papers. He looked past them at me standing in the driveway, and his face did something complicated, not guilt, not exactly, more like recalibration, the look of a man who has just realized the board is not arranged the way he thought it was. He said, across the distance, "Claire, let's talk about this." I said, "You have 72 hours. Diane said something sharp from behind him. Kelsey appeared on the stairs behind them. She looked at me and then looked away, and in that look I saw the thing I had always suspected and never wanted to confirm. She had always known, on some level, that what was happening was wrong. She had just found it more convenient not to say so. My father said, "We're family." I waited a moment before I answered. Not for effect. Because I genuinely wanted to get it right. I said, "You locked me out of my house. You are a guest who stopped acting like one. Family is not a key that opens every door." He didn't have an answer for that. They were out within 48 hours. I don't know where they went first. I know my father called me 3 times in the first week. I didn't answer. I know Diane sent me a long text message that I read once, understood was an attempt to reframe events in her favor, and deleted. I know Kelsey sent me a separate message that simply said, "I'm sorry. I should have said something." That one I kept. Here is what happened in the weeks after. Daniel connected me with Patricia, the estate attorney who had worked with my mother and who had been quietly maintaining the trust for 17 years while she waited to see if it would be needed. She was 71 years old and sharp as anything, and the first thing she said to me when we met was, "Your mother described you to me when you were 11. She said you were the kind of person who keeps going." She was right. I had to take a minute after that before I could speak. The trust, it turned out, held more than a protective deed. My mother had continued to add to it in the last months of her life. There was a sum of money, not a number I will say publicly, but meaningful, carefully saved from a life insurance policy my father had not known existed because it named the trust, not him, as beneficiary. Patricia had invested it conservatively for 17 years. It had grown. Ruth, for her part, had her own surprise. She had decided, somewhere in the previous year, when she realized things in my house had gone far off course, to make me a partner in one of her smaller investment properties, a duplex in Columbus she'd owned for 12 years. She did not ask for money. She said, Your mother would have done this herself. I'm just catching up. I cried in Ruth's car in the parking lot of Patricia's law office for about 10 minutes. Ruth handed me a travel pack of Kleenex and said, "You're allowed. Take your time." Then she started the car and took me to lunch. My house is my house again. I repainted the rooms. Diane changed back to the colors I had originally chosen. I got new kitchen curtains, nothing fancy, just white, just clean, just mine. I cleared everything of Kelsey's out of my second bathroom and put a small plant on the counter instead. My father called again. 2 months later. This time, I answered. The conversation was short and not unkind, but it was clear. I told him that I was willing, at some point, to have a relationship with him, but that it would be a relationship between equals, not a negotiation where one person's comfort and convenience was always purchased with the other person's dignity. He said he understood. I don't know if he did. I think he is trying. I think about my mother sometimes, sitting in a law office when she was very sick, making sure her daughter would be okay. Not dramatically, not heroically, just methodically, and with tremendous love, setting up structures to protect a person she would not be there to protect herself. I became a nurse because I watched my mother be cared for in her last months, and I wanted to be one of the people who did that for others. I have never regretted that. But I think I understand it differently now. Care is not always visible. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do for someone they love is something quiet, something documented, something that waits. My mother waited 17 years for me. That is the kind of love that doesn't need to knock. It already has a key. If you're watching this and you have a Ruth in your life, someone who has been paying attention, someone who shows up in your driveway when you didn't know you needed them, tell them. Today. Don't wait. And if you don't have one yet, I hope you find her. I hope everyone gets to find her. Thank you for being here with me today. This channel is about rebuilding the quiet, unglamorous, steady work of building a life that is actually yours. If this story meant something to you, leave me a comment. I read every single one. And if there is someone in your life who needs to hear that they deserve a space that is completely theirs, share this with them. I'll see you in the next one.